And now? Now is better. Okay, so I think that we can start. I am Piotr Podlipniak. I have the great pleasure to be a chair of this session which is devoted to consciousness and perception with 6 presentations, very interesting presentations. Every speaker, just to remind you, every speaker has 20 minutes to presentation, and we have 5 minutes for questions and answers. And the first speaker is the Peter Moddel, and his presentation is titled "Consciousness and the Perception of Color: A Breakthrough in the Understanding of Color and Color Formation Brings New tools to the study of consciousness." So the floor is yours.
I think the microphone's not necessary. I'll speak loud.
But it is necessary for
the
online.
All right. Very good. So I'm not shouting in your ears, I hope. So, good. The question that I'm bringing is, where does color come from? It's the source of color. And the interest in this, the whole idea of the concurrent sessions, which are quite short, it's not the time to open a wide vista of the situation. So if I can just bring one idea that's revealing, that gives a perspective, I'm happy with that, and I hope you will be too. So where is color? When you see a colored object, where is the color you see? Is it in the object? Is it in the light? Is it in the mind? And if it's in the mind, where is that? Yes. Yes. And so we run into trouble. And can we clear that up a little bit, is what I'd like to do. So, yes, it's hard to hold the mic at the same time. Okay. I'll keep my notes with me because philosophers have the tendency to be romantic about words, and things can stretch out, the time can stretch out. So, on a simple level, this talk answers questions about color, but on a deeper and the deeper motive I have at this conference is to show how philosophy can resolve unanswered questions that are scientific. So let's dive in. Yeah, okay, good. Right, so what I'll give is just one very short version, and the wider viewpoint can be, and the details are in the book. What we know is life, if we just take a few basic scientific facts, what we know as light is the vibrational frequency to which our eyes are sensitive. When it's strong, we see it as bright. When it's weaker, we see it as dim. Sorry. This is very, no, it's the mic bothers me. I can't think at the same time. So, all right. Where was I? Yes. Sorry. Yes. Right. So light itself has no color, and this is well known. Even though you've probably heard about different colors, wavelengths of light that are blue or red or something like that. But that's just a shorthand for speaking about it. It's like when we talk, say the sun moves across the sky from east to west. It's not a factual description of what transpires at that moment. But as a shorthand, it works well. And so all wavelengths of light are colorless. Wavelength is not the source of color. Let's, for instance, take this example. Thank you. When you see a leaf, the objective description is that light coming from the leaf and reaching our eyes is brightness only. It's not colored. However, From our subjective point of view, what we see is a green leaf. How does this happen? It's the transition from light with no color to color that interests us, and that's the enigma. And we can put this down as a postulate already. When you can explain, thank you. When we see color, we are observing the outcome of a transition from colorless to color. And this is in all cases of seeing color. I can bring others, but I'll just set it out like that for now. The light we receive stimulates cone-shaped cells on the eye, and that you know well. There are 3 types of cone cells, and they have different sensitivities to the wavelengths, to the different wavelengths of light. Edwin Gland and others in research have shown that the 3 cones separately form their images, and it's only in the latter stage of the visual process that the 3 cones are combined to form the image we see. If the 3 cones show the same image, all is well, and we can see what we're looking at. If, on the other hand, the 3 cones don't agree on what is seen, for instance, what is brighter than what in the image is different on the 3 cone ends, then there's a problem, because we are not able to see 3 different images at one time. So, when light reaching the eye is full spectrum, all the wavelengths are illuminated and the cones agree one with another. And of course, this will be seeing black or white, black and white and grays. And if the light is dim, then it's dim for all the cone cells at the same time. However, if light contains only part of the full spectrum, the view of different cone sets contrast one another. Let's take this example. You can see the flower. The cone cells sensitive to the longer wavelengths will see the yellow and the orange as bright, and the green and the leaves as dim. The cone cells that are sensitive to the opposite, to the short wavelengths, will see the cone cells as bright. It will see the leaves as bright, and the petals will seem dimmer. So the 3 cone sets produce conflicting views that are an impediment to seeing. You can already see where this leads. When there's conflict in brightness between the different cone sets, what we see is color. Or to say it the other way around, when we see color, it can be traced back to contradiction between the cone cells. And so we can move to postulate 2, which is, in all cases where color appears, brightness relationships registered by the 3 cone sets are in contradiction. But of course you know this already. You know when you see red that there are longer wavelengths dominant, and when you see blue colors, it's the shorter wavelengths that are there to have a dominant position. So what's special about what I've presented now? And what's special is the fact that we realize we've the description back to front, the cart before the horse. Color vision does not start with the color we see, and then we can analyze it into the different wavelengths. It starts with a mix of wavelengths, and what does that produce? Contradiction. And so, we're left with 3 views that don't match. The process of color are these 3 views that don't match. that come together and poof, there's color. Where did that happen? And so we can go one more. Thank you. So the appearance of color is the enigma. From where does the color come? And why is the question of color formation still not solved today, after so long? Newton was looking to explain color through, to find the source of color in light. And neuroscientists today search to find the explanation in the skull, in the activity of neurons. It's this attitude that has led our understanding astray. The enigma persists because color research has been directed at finding an objective physical cause, while the answer lies in another direction. Thank you. I'd like to take Federico Fagin, who will be here at the end of this week, who, in explaining quantum physics, in his book Irreducible, makes the following statement. I suggest we don't understand quantum physics mainly because we don't want to accept at the psychological level what it's telling us. And we want to continue to believe the real world is the deterministic one described by classical physics. Color research is just the same. It looks for the material world, to the material world, while the colors manifest out of the creativity of an individual being that perceives it. So with this, we arrive at the kernel of the talk. To the contribution of philosophy that breaks through certain limitations that that are often imposed by a scientific approach. Excuse me. Now you remember the situation? Cone sets form views that don't match, and color suddenly appears. From where does it appear? How does it appear? When does it appear? And what is it? I'd like to ask this question to everybody here and have it take the discussion from this point. But if we do that, there won't be any follow-up to what comes afterwards. So I say, to the question, what produces color? The answer is, you do. Yes. Colors do not ensue as an automatic response to the incoming light, for they require an individual creative being imbued with purpose. Producing color is not simply the body's sensory apparatus responding to impulses. And I'll describe why. To begin with, what's required for there to be a contradiction? Three incompatible views in themselves, they don't form a contradiction. This is obvious if we consider the following analogy. Across a roadway lies a massive fallen tree. The cyclist, I'm afraid he's not in the picture, he just moved away for a moment. For the cyclist who's there, the tree across the road is not an impediment. In order for it to be an impediment, that cyclist must have the intent to continue along the road. It's the individual's intent to proceed that's blocked by the tree. In the same manner, three incompatible cone views only form an impediment when the observer has an intent. Unspoken perhaps, but the intent to see. It's the observer's intent that is blocked by the conflicting views of the concepts. And so you see the subjective point of view is extremely important here to understand what the process is. So we see the description must include, one, the presence of intent, and in addition, two other subjective factors. Intelligence, which is the intelligence of the being to recognize what it sees. And two, and three actually, creativity, the ability to move beyond the impediment and find other solutions or another solution. The subjective point of view is essential in this. Facing the impediment, the observer takes action without the need for conscious thought. You could say the solution to the problem happens through the presence of non-conscious consciousness. But of course that's gibberish. You're not going to get to anything with that, to any deeper understanding. So in my writing with this, what I've spoken of as two modes of consciousness. One is conceptual consciousness, which happens in thought, consciousness of an object. And the other is very different. It's expanded consciousness, which bypasses the conceptual process, the conceptual consciousness. Both functions of consciousness are received and integrated into the living system of the being that's perceiving. Facing an impediment in the contradictory views, I'm going back now, without the need to engage thought, the views are brought together and brought to cohabit on a much more subtle level of seeing, no longer in terms of light and dark, but transformed into color that the observer, the observing person or subject sees. And yet, from an objective point of view, nothing happened. The three different concepts still register contradictory illumination. No change has occurred in the light that registered on the eye. However, for the subject, all is transformed. The perceiver has perceived, has pierced through the impediment present in black and white to unify coherent images by introducing color. With our sensory system, and we and all beings repeatedly perform creative transactions, transforming the impulses we receive into perceptions. In my writing, in the books, there are numerous examples of this. Yeah. So this is a place to pause, and maybe I'd better hurry on. I don't know how many minutes. Oh, I see. And I wanted to have time for questions. It's gone. Okay, so. Oh, I see. All right. That it's all right. So this is the place to realize the magnitude of what has been described. Color production offers a stark and obvious example of the integral involvement of individual beings in perception, and on a much larger scale, it may offer an example of how we bring reality we know to manifest. I'll stop there right now. And so, the next slide.
Okay, thank you very much for very interesting talk. So now we have 6 minutes to questions and answers. So who would like to ask the first question?
Hello. Hello, Peter.
Yes.
Okay, I think it's on now. Is that better? Okay, good. So, are you addressing the hard problem, Or is your approach to say, well, you have this contradiction of the intensities of these of the outputs of these three types of cones, which has to correspond to a different color, but the experience of color still isn't there. So are you saying that that is just what it is?
No, I didn't have I jumped the last paragraphs. But a very good question. Yes, you're asking in the direction of the thought. And what happens is, as a creative being, there is a possibility of a solution to, and color is the solution of having different images fused into one. And we're calling in that possibility out of potentiality, out of what is possible in the universe, into actuality for the person that sees it. So there's an individual action by the being who sees, who produces the color that resolves the problem. And it's a transfer from potentiality to reality, which has to do with a lot of other things. Yes? And so in many ways, it softens the whole problem of...
Right. So it could have been something else. In other words, instead of having the beautiful reds and greens that we see, it could have been different speckle rates, or it could have been stars flashing or stripes or something like that.
Wonderful
that would have
question.
indicated color to us, but it would just been a different modality.
Wonderful question. When we go into it in detail, we see that the contradictions are only resolved by a certain shade of color. And each set of contradictions, each color we see or shade we see is the resolution of a certain mix of contradictions. So that actually the final conclusion is that when we look out at the world and different people seeing the sunrise, we're all seeing the experience of red that one has is the experience within certain limits of red that everybody has. And so suddenly there's an answer to the age-old question of are we seeing the same colors? And you can show that because there's only one possible color that resolves those contradictions, we're all producing the same color and experiencing the same color. That's in the book. That's something to develop further. Okay.
We have one question here.
All right.
Hello, thank you for the beautiful talk. I wanted to ask about intent, and for me, the intent could be interpreted as giving meaning to contradictory sensations. So do you think meaning, like trying to give a meaning, plays a role there, and creativity is the way to give meaning?
Very beautiful. And yes, very much. That meaning demands intent, and the observer and it demands also a living being. And so meaning is something that we're creating in everything we see. This fits well, I believe, with Federico Faggini's approach. But, yes.
Okay, we have next question.
Can you comment on the implications for color graphing synesthesia?
Yes, I don't think I've got something I can add to you right now on that. I'd love to discuss it, but I don't have a cherry to offer on that.
Again, thank you. Can you comment on the role of contrast in your model?
Yes.
Because there is this optical illusions where you have a chessboard and then there's a field that is gray but looks redder than an actual red.
I have a whole set of them.
You have a whole set? Okay, we'll meet afterwards. Okay.
I have to limit it, but taking, yes, there are the answer is that there is no optical illusion. And we call the Benham top and things like that, the spinning top that turns from black to color. And things like that, they're called optical illusions as if they were different from everything else, but they're not. Every time you see color, it's real color. There's no artificial step-in imposter artificially creating color. Color is what we see, and it's the result of the role of contrasts, and we can analyze the contrasts in the book. You'll see that actually after colored shadows and a lot of effects of color are actually understandable as we producing the color that resolves the situation present before us.
Okay, thank you.
That's a very short answer.
So very short last question.
Yes. Thank you very much for your talk. I would like to ask about the philosophical implications of your approach, and if you are proposing an interactionist account, which means that there is the physical realm producing sensory stimuli and so on. And as you said, human beings are also creative in producing color. And so would this be another level of reality which interacts with the physical level in a certain way?
The first part of the question I leave out because that's a question of a idealist or what philosophy. That'll take too long. Yeah, but the second part, are we creating these? Yes, and much more than color. In the end of it all, if I see a chair, the dictionary will give me a one-sentence description of a chair, but actually I wouldn't understand what a chair is without a whole knowledge of sitting, of moving, of resting, of and on and on and on. So actually we're bringing a multitude of information, of understanding to every object we recognize. So the meanings we create, going back to you, yes, we're creating this fusion from a whole lot of experience, actual and perhaps even through time. Yes? Good.
Okay, thank you again, Peter, for a very interesting talk. And now I'd like to invite the next speaker, Brent Allsop, and his talk is Physicists Don't Yet Understand Color Qualities. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Peter. That was a very complimentary talk to my own. If I could have expanded mine to be 40 minutes, it would have been mine and his probably. So that's, and I think we have a lot in agreement. And during my talk, I'm going to make some assertions that some people in here may disagree with. So if anyone disagrees, feel free to flag it just by a wave of a hand. And then at the end, hopefully we can have time to address that. But the first thing I'm going to assert is the same thing that Peter asserted. When you look at those red flowers, is the quality you experience, is it a quality of those flowers, or is it a quality of your knowledge of those flowers, your subjective knowledge of, is it a quality of something in your brain? And the assertion is that it is the quality of something in your brain. And so, and I also assert that if you can understand discover what that redness quality is, then you can solve the hard problem of consciousness. So it's not a real hard problem of consciousness, it's just a color quality problem. And if we can solve that, we can reverse the problem. And it's easy to prove that color is a quality of our knowledge. It's not a property of the strawberry if you analyze the cause and effect perception process. Anywhere in the chain of cause and effect perception, you can place an inversion and invert the red and the green. In the B example, you've got a phone that's doing inversion before the retina. It's changing the red light to green light and green light to red light. And in that case, it appears that the strawberry on the screen is what has the greenness quality. But that intuition, that seeming, can be falsified if you move the inversion to immediately after the retina as displayed in the C case. And in the C case, he has the same quality of knowledge. His strawberry has the same greenness quality, even though red light is landing on his retina. And there's the critical problem. Science can't explain what is that green responsible for that greenness quality when red light is landing on his retina. And if we can solve that problem and figure what that is, then we can apply the rest and solve, not only tell what is and isn't conscious, but what is it like. And so another important thing is to distinguish between reality and knowledge of reality. The pencil out there, you can doubt that it really exists in the idealist world, but you can't doubt that your knowledge of that pencil is bent. And you can't doubt that your knowledge of that pencil has that yellowness quality. That's absolute and that's invariant. You can't fail to have the wrong understanding of your knowledge of that pencil. And so what this means is there must be some other way that we're getting this quality, we're directly apprehending this quality. It's not a perception process. And so perception through our senses is abstract, and qualia perception is direct. But perception's done from afar through a cause and effect chain of perception, where direct apprehension is direct. And perception is abstract and substrate independent, but conscious qualities are substrate dependent. And the perception is dependent on correct interpretations of all the representations along the chain that's representing that information. But there is no interpretation of the quality of our knowledge. It's just a physical fact that that's what you know. And so perception can always be mistaken if it's not interpreted correctly, but your direct perception of your knowledge of the color of that pencil, that can't be mistaken. And so another part of the problem is, since our senses are abstracting, it's like this text. You can't communicate the nature of redness quality. Even if you had an infinitely long book, you can't communicate what redness is like. You can describe redness, and you can label redness, red, green, and all that, with text, but mapping one to the other, you need the dictionary. Another problem is the way we observe the brain. A lot of people, it's popular in the press these days, are observing knowledge in the brain, and they produce the knowledge that they detect in the brain on computer screens. And Jack Gallant was one of the first ones to do this back in 2011. And so they put them in an fMRI, and then they have to train the fMRI to know when you see this particular behavior, you display redness on the screen, and when you see this different particular behavior, you display greenness on the screen. But if you imagine putting that qualia invert, who's engineered to represent red knowledge with your greenness quality, if you put that into his system, you're going to train the system to, when it sees the greenness quality, it's going to put red knowledge on the screen when he's observing the quality. And so basically what that does is it blinds him to the qualities that he may really be observing in the brain. And so that's the other problem. And the other problem is ambiguous terminology. All throughout the media and in both physics and philosophy of mind and everywhere, it's real ambiguous. When someone says red, you can't tell if they're talking about the properties of the strawberry or they're talking about the properties of your knowledge of the strawberry. And so it's important that you clearly distinguish between that and so you can define red to be a property of the strawberry or anything that reflects or emits 650 nanometer light, and define redness to be something very different, the subjective quality of our knowledge of things. And if you do that sufficiently, you can ineffable nature. So imagine those two qualia inverts, if they met to each other and they wanted to communicate what their redness was like to the other person, they could say, my redness is like your greenness, both of which we call red. And that's an effing of the ineffable statement, because it's got sufficient terminology and well defined so you can communicate what one quality is to someone else. And let's go back here. And also, if you think of why do we call a strawberry red, it reflects red light. But that's why it reflects red light because of its properties. The light isn't anything like the properties of the strawberry. So as soon as you causally get away from it through a perception process, you're getting away from the properties that you're trying to directly apprehend. And I think we should think about the quality in our brain in the same way. There's something in our brain that's behaving the way it does because of its redness quality. An example I like to use is a neurotransmitter. It's a theoretical possibility that glutamate is reacting in a synapse the way it does because of its subjective redness quality. And so there could be glycine for greenness or ascorbate for whiteness. And if you're representing your knowledge of that glutamate with ascorbate, that's a mistranslation. That's really great redness, but you're representing with knowledge that has a whiteness quality. And so we just got to get the dictionary and mapping right and be able to demonstratively prove that. And so that's the whole point of the question, is we have all these abstract descriptions of everything in the brain, but that doesn't tell us what any of that stuff in the brain is qualitatively, subjectively like. So it's just a matter of looking at the brain in a non-qualia blind way and matching up the subjective qualities with the what we objectively observe. And yeah, and so if you get back to the what is required to directly apprehend, to do this kind of directly apprehension. So we have knowledge of our visual field in our right hemisphere, half of our knowledge in our right hemisphere, and the other half of our knowledge is in the left hemisphere. And somehow the corpus callosum that connects those two hemispheres binds those two together. So we experience this half of the world and this side, this half of the world and this side unified together as one unified gestalt experience. And a lot of people talk about the corpus callosum is one hemisphere communicating with the other in an abstract way. But that's not, it can't be just that. There's some way that the corpus callosum is binding that into one unified experience. So we experience both the qualities of the left and the qualities of the right all at the same time. And so if that's the case, could we do our two hemispheres with someone else's brain? And that's, so that's been portrayed in movies. And let's see if we can get this going here. I had this working before. Well, there it was. So yeah, this was portrayed in Avatar. Not many
Our knowledge of our left field of vision is represented in our right hemisphere, and vice versa for the other hemisphere of knowledge. The corpus callosum must be performing a kind of subjective binding, enabling both hemispheres to be subjectively bound into one unified gestalt experience. They could theoretically do the same subjective binding between two brains as done between our brain hemispheres. This would enable us to directly apprehend the qualities in someone else's brain. We could know infallibly how an invert qualifies were different from our own. A bat could be engineered to represent echolocation knowledge of flying bugs with your redness, and you could subjectively bind elemental qualities that could make up a natural bat's knowledge so you could directly experience them yourself. Our knowledge of our left field of vision
Okay, yeah. So let me run quickly over to here. So there's different ways of effing the ineffable, and my redness is like your greenness, both of which we call red, would be the weak form, because you have to have dictionaries, and those dictionaries could be fallible. But that's basically, you have to have a definition for what the term red means in a way that you can communicate to someone else. And the stronger form of effing the ineffable, if you know there's a type of shrimp that has like 18 colors. And so they have a whole bunch of different qualities that probably none of us have ever experienced. And so if you could take whatever it is that has those qualities and subjectively bind them into your mind and say, this is Gru, the different color that you've never experienced, and you go, oh, that's what Gru is like. That's what that phantom shrimp is like. And then the strongest form of effing the ineffable is that with the neural ponytail, where you subjectively bind your left hemisphere is using the strongest form of effing the ineffable, so that you experience both qualia all at the same time. So if you subjectively bound with your partner and your partner had inverted qualia, you would experience that directly. Oh, your redness is like mine, and that would be in an infallible way. And so if we come back here. But anyway, yeah. And so we're working on a consensus, a building and tracking system at canonizer.com to build consensus around this or any other better theory. And so if you're interested, if you thought this is a good idea, that analyzing color like this would really help approach this problem, you could go to that. And I've got some papers up here with the same information on it. If I could get all of you to go there and either support that and sign the petition, that would be very helpful. Or if you have a competing idea, you could create a competing camp and may the best camp achieve the most consensus. And so, yeah, that's pretty much the end. And so, thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we have time for questions. I see the first hand.
Well, thank you very much. I think the first time today I've heard something very useful on qualia. We've heard a lot of different uses of that term, and mostly connected with actual physical correlates and what is experienced rather than what are the actual experience. I've got two things. First, I wanted to get your comment on your view of what you've heard others speak about qualia. But first, you mentioned that redness, subjective quality of knowledge. Now, of course, this harks to Frank Jackson and the knowledge thing. Would it be better not to say experience? It's our experience of redness?
Yeah, that might be true. That's a good, I go back and forth with different terminology over the years. And yeah, it's just, and terminology is the hardest part of this whole thing. Everyone uses different terms to say the same thing. So, but yeah, I'll take that into consideration. Thank you.
Now, your comment on how others have used qualia today.
Yeah, well, pretty much everyone, even in the scientific world, agrees that we have qualias. Like even Daniel Dennett thinks there's qualia. He just says we don't understand it, so just ignore it. He says, yeah, we have qualia. He has the best definition of qualia, but he just says ignore it. But that's not good science to ignore it. But this tries to make it objective, and there's just a different way to computationally binding find out what qualia is, but anyway, so everyone agrees there's qualia, but the lack of agreement is what are qualia. The example I gave with glutamate behaving the way it does, that's a materialist theory, but there, of course, the majority of theoretician, the consensus is pretty much around functionalism. So if it's functionalism that has the redness quality, then you have to objectively observe the redness function, and you objectively observe the greenness function. We don't know what qualia is. That's up to the experimentalist, because we're building a whole bunch of theories that are predicting what redness is. Now it's just up to the experimentalist to go through and try all the different theories until they find out which one, oh, this is the one that's subjective redness, and that'll falsify all of the other theories. So, and it could be subatomic, could be quantum, who knows what a redness quality is, but we just need to start looking at an objective and in a non-qualia blind way so we can connect the objective and the subjective.
Thank you. Next question. Okay.
Hi, you talked about the corpus callosum connecting the two hemispheres as though, correct me if I'm wrong, the subjective experiences are happening, the actual direct correlate of these are happening in the separate hemispheres. Now, do you have evidence, like, because for example, there are groups of people who have had the corpus callosum cut because of epilepsy? Is there evidence that they have, like, for example, their subjectivity is lacking half a visual field, or?
Yeah, it depends on how it's done. The idea is that there could be some lower level to the corpus callosum doing this computational binding, and so, but there are cases where the right hemisphere has been lesions in the right hemisphere, and they are blind in the right hemisphere, but they still have knowledge in the left hemisphere. And depending on how much of it's cut, you can cause those problems. And sometimes when it's cut, people always lose their left. Typically, when they cut their brain, the visual self is in one side, and the speaking self is in the left side.
Right.
And the left side person will say, I don't know what that is, but the right hand side hand is waving, yes, I do, it's this color here. And so there is evidence that, so it just depends on how the wiring's done and what you cut.
I'd be really interested to know if the visual person in the, whatever the right left, actually has a visual experience, even if it's not accurate of the full visual field. You see, they may not see some in what they may have a neglect of things that are in there, but they may still say that they see the whole visual experience.
Yeah.
So, you know, that would suggest to me that the vision was simply cut upstream of where consciousness is, you see.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So that'll be interesting. Because my view is that consciousness is kind of more compact. I'm a Cartesian theatre person. I think that there is a small, tiny little place in the brain where consciousness takes place, and I think all the information streams feed in.
Okay.
That's the difference. You know, so anyway.
Oh, okay.
But thanks, though. It's a good talk.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to ask the next question?
Also on Dan Dennett, he said that there is no second transduction. So there is first transduction of colors into chemical signals or electrochemical signals, and then there's no second transduction, right? But
well, basically, the idea is your perception system detects the light and does a lot of processing to clean things up, and then it renders the knowledge into your primary visual cortex in a 3D picture, if you will, of what your knowledge is. So
yes, but so before we discuss if there's a Cartesian theater or if there is a second discussion, can't we just all agree that there is no first transduction?
I see your question about the Cartesian theater. So this isn't. Yeah, and that's the thing, is no one's perceiving this knowledge. It's the result of perception. It is the knowledge. There's no perceiver. It just is the knowledge. And also so in other words, if you expand that further, what that means is we all have a 3D model of this room in our brain made of our color qualities, and at the center of that is all of our bodies, and at the top of that is our head, and our knowledge of ourself peering out of that is our knowledge of our spirit. So we have knowledge of a spirit, but unlike all that other knowledge, there's no referent in reality. It's just the knowledge itself. And so it's subjectively rendered into our consciousness as if that knowledge is perceiving the redness quality, but it's not really perceiving. It's just directly apprehending all that knowledge. And to me, that's what a CPU, phenomenal CPU is. It's what it's like for a phenomenal system to do computation, because we have the knowledge of the self that is represented as if it's perceiving the redness qualities, but it's not really perceiving. It's just aware of all of it together, represented in that way. Does that answer your question? But essentially, it's what you said. You just eliminate that because it's not a Cartesian theater. It's just the result, and it's just the way knowledge is, the way phenomenal computation happens. Does that answer your question?
Okay. May I have a maybe naive question, but I have a question about the relations between knowledge and the experience, because we know, for example, that there are some languages in which there are some names for some colors, but on the other hand, we know that there are some women who have So does it mean that we can have different qualia, different experiences than knowledge, and how to recognize whether
as long as you separate reality from knowledge of reality, all of those systems can be accounted for and engineered to happen the way we see it happening. So like someone mentioned the chessboard and the different squares that appear to be different, and then when you move them together you see they're the same. But the reason that is because our subjective processing renders it in a slightly different color, and so it depends on how our knowledge is rendered. If our knowledge based on the context can render different qualia into our knowledge despite the same stimulus. So all of that stuff can be engineered and accounted for as long as you distinguish between reality and knowledge of reality.
Yeah, maybe this is the question about categorization, because I have the impression that when I see some shades of colors, I know that they are categorized as the same name, but still I have different qualia. So thanks. We have 1 minute for a question, so maybe a very short question to.
Okay.
If not,
thank you very much.
Thank you again. And the next speaker is Michal Polák, and his presentation is titled Vividness, Content-Invariant Property of Experience.
Okay, thank you very much to the organizers for this wonderful event, and for me kind of surprising, although I expected that there will be a lot of stuff from quantum physics. So now currently I'm in a situation that I think I should learn more about quantum physics in terms of in relation to consciousness. But I will talk about still in a somewhat classical way. I'm a philosopher by training, so I will talk about a particular problem or particular thing that might be of an interest for some of you, at least that. And the title of the talk is that vividness is a content, or that this is basically the suggestion, and I will try to explain it. What I mean by that is a content invariant property of experience. So I will try to focus on it and try to show what I mean by that. So vividness is a content-free dimension, or maybe a parameter or property of what it is like, experience. Now, I will briefly, the outline is as follows. I will briefly elaborate on vividness and clarity, plus about past and other scales, perceptual awareness scale, but there's much more to be said about other concepts that are close to clarity, both to clarity and vividness, but I just stick to these one because this seems to be overwhelming in selected kind of literature on imaginary mostly. And then I will move to two reasons why we say something is more or less vivid, and this concerns the two approaches, the what I call content-specific approach and content-free approach, or content-specific and content-free dimension of experience. And finally, I will briefly mention an empirical case for vividness as the intensity dimension, or kind of empirical support that I found quite recently in the literature, but there seems to be a little bit more of that to support this view. So first, to avoid a hassle of representationalism, for those of you who are philosophers, I will just consider perceptual content simply as phenomenal character. I will use them interchangeably. The phenomenal character, like the subjective properties, mental qualities, whatever. And where I refer to the properties of perceived objects, I will use the term stimulus properties or stimulus constituting features, or for example, when we talk about surface spectral reflectance profile and so on, so which has been presented also in the other talks. So the question is, what is vividness? One may start by asking whether vividness is a content part of perception, as claimed by some people, or is it rather non-specific contentless feature of perception? I will call the earlier approach, content-specific approach, and the opposite view, the content-free approach. Now, when we make some preliminary search of how the term vividness is used, probably the best known scale in consciousness research applying the notion of vividness, usually as far as I know, as far as I can tell, usually as a clarity, in the meaning of clarity, is the perceptual awareness scale. So the scale, you surely know how this is standardly scaled, and the scale has 4 levels: no experience, brief glimpse, almost clear image, absolutely clear image. There are different versions of them, but this seems to be the standard one. And we may find different formulations about what it measures. Now, let's quote: degrees of clearness in perceiving visual stimuli, or in the case of almost clear experience item, a feeling of almost being certain about one's answer, accompanied by the comment that some stimulus aspects are experienced more vividly than others. So I would say that most often past is characterized as which is an important measurement, is characterized as a measurement of subjective stimulus awareness. This is also that you can find in the literature. Those that like sunbreak. And from the overall context, it seems that stimulus awareness and express clarity is one and the same thing. However, the relationship between clarity and vividness remains unanswered in these studies applying PAS. And then there are scales that explicitly declare tracking vividness. They use the terms such as different versions of imagery questionnaires, not only for visual experiences like the vividness, VVIQ, vividness of visual imagery questionnaire, but also for olfactory experiences, for olfactory imaginary experiences, or for olfactory imagination, and auditory experiences at the clarity of auditory imagery scale or the Bucknell auditory imagery scale. All concerns mental imagery or this kind of area. So these are applied on imagery experiences and ask directly on how much an experience of an image was vivid. For example, in the study by Cornell and colleagues, they first try to identify parameters or variables that affect subjects' quantitative rating of how vivid an imagery experience is or was, or an image was when subjectively in an experience. They identified 6 characteristics: presence of colors, presence of a rich context, pardon, emergence of salient features, richness of details, and well-defined shape and contour, and the last one is generality of the represented object. And they believe that the same characteristics can be used for perceptual experience as well to render a perceived object vivid. So maybe we can use this scaling also for visual experiences. Aside the convergent tendencies of identifying vividness as clarity, there are also conceptualizations that in visual imagery that emphasize the difference between vividness and clarity. For example, this study by Hubbard takes vividness in visual imagery as analogical to the function of saturation in perception. Whereas as regards clarity, they take clarity to be analogical to the function of resolution. So reconsidered in the context of visual perception, it seems that, simply speaking, the more saturated the object of perception, the stronger the vividness. And the better the resolution of the object of perception, the stronger the clarity. But generally, the attempts to define clarity in relation to vividness are rare and problematic. And this is why, for example, philosopher Amy Kind, in Imaginative Vividness paper, points out that the term vividness would be best excluded from both perceptual and imagery terminology. Maybe this will happen also in the talk, but I hope not for that. Putting aside the important debate on whether the clarity and vividness should be distinguished or rather considered the same, it seems obvious that all the introduced uses of vividness rely on stimulus features, the content constituting features. So the notion of vividness is based on the idea that certain content features of objects make our experience of them more or less vivid. It's content-based approach. Perfectly clear and vivid is that what is rich, what is well defined, what is salient, etc. in terms of stimulus properties. I call this notion content constituted vividness, and this notion is based on the assumption that there is always kind of positive correlation between the precision of the stimulus properties and the declared vividness. And simply the stronger the stimulus in these content determining features of the objects, and the stronger the vividness. In contrast, the notion I propose here is broader, as it admits that even less salient features, and that's the main point I would hope for, that this is the main point of the talk, is that it admits that even less salient features in their stimulus properties, and even the less salient features of a stimulus can be more vivid than more salient ones. And this is what I tend to call this notion here, content-free constituted vividness. Now, from my point of view, there are likely 2 reasons why we say something is more or less vivid. The first reason is the changes taking place in the perceptual content profile, then finally in the phenomenal properties. And the second is the non-qualitative changes in the intensity with which we experience the stimulus. So it's a preferred, I would say it's preferred and perhaps intuitive view that the vividness is a property of content or part of content. As far as perceptual content properties change, the vividness fluctuates from more faint to more vivid phenomenal experiences. For example, this seems to me to be found in this quotation from Bourget, where it's claimed that it seems intelligible, or at least potentially intelligible, that the vividness of an experience amounts to nothing more than the vividness of its contents. And that the content is vivid when it involves a concrete combination of properties. Now, even more interesting picture of this content-specific approach can be found in Fazekas in a recent paper, which I really like. I recommend it very much, where vividness in visual perception involves two dimensions, or a group of characteristic features. One is, there are two broad categories. One is subjective specificity, and the other is subjective intensity. And subjective specificity is determined by these three features, or these three properties, also kind of categorical properties. It's precision, blurriness, and detailedness. And subjective intensity is defined by contrast, saturation, and brightness. So Fazekas subsumes both dimensions to the category of perceptual content properties, and these two categories together constitute the vividness. They are still, in Fazekas' case, as far as I hope I read it correctly, but Fazekas still thinks that these are the perceptual content properties because they determine the content. Their vividness is determined by them. But I have to say that, to my best knowledge, the debates about the degree of vividness usually correspond to the later categories. So these are the claims about contrast, saturation, and brightness, at least overwhelmingly. More contrast, more saturation, more brightness amounts to being more vivid of a stimulus. But even if it were not the case, both categories of properties introduced by Fazekas, I think, are content-specific or content-constituting properties, or maybe functionally related. It depends on how you want to take it. So I hypothesize that vividness need not necessarily be considered as a content-constituting property, and the suggestion is that it may refer rather to the intensity which we experience a given stimulus, regardless of the content properties of the stimulus. Now, I know it looks like a very strong claim, but I will try to argue for it, try to find some kind of empirical evidence, and I will try to unpack it a little bit. I find quite reasonable to distinguish two basic dimensions of the experiential things, or what is like experience, and this is fine to say that it can be differentiated into subjective specificity and subjective intensity properties. But unlike Fazekas, my view is that these two dimensions might be necessary, but not sufficient for the emergence of what it is likeness. Something more is needed, and what is needed is the vividness. Only if there is a vividness, you can say that there is something is like what it is like. The suggestion is there is one more dimension or property, which is, I don't know how to call it. I tend to call it quantitative, but it's not exactly what I want. And we can get back to it in the discussion, but it's a kind of experienced intensity of the stimulus. A model I propose is based on the assumption that changes in the stimulus properties profile may have, of course, their causal consequence in a changes in vividness. Some salient properties of the stimulus launch the feeling of vividness or increase the intensity of vividness, to be sure about that. But the property of vivacity or liveliness of our experience, and that's the suggestion, adds nothing of content to the phenomenal experience. It's content-free. So it cannot be content-like property or content-determined property. Even if you are a presentationalist, you cannot explain it by relation to the external properties. Or at least not completely. I state that maybe what is likeness is a way of consciously experiencing a phenomenal character, and the vividness is a parameter of the intensity of this experience. Now, all this is framed by, and it's important to say that, but at least a little bit, by a concept of two-factor model, or we call it originally dual model, as we put it in some papers as dual model bond, but then it was recommended to us that maybe we should change for some reason that I cannot explain now, should change the terminology. So I will talk about two-factor model, although in the papers I recommend I use the term dual model. And I cannot go into details on it here, but let me only briefly emphasize the substantial to the vividness topic. The starting point of two-factor model is the claim that phenomenal aspects of our perceptual experience can be separated from conscious aspects and treated independently of consciousness. Arguably, the most serious consequence of this separation is that it seems to reveal a possibility of unconscious phenomenality, highly controversial thing. In the traditional orthodox model, which we call in the paper orthodox model, there is only conscious phenomenality. Phenomenality and consciousness, you cannot separate these two concepts, because if you talk about phenomenality, you always talk about conscious phenomenality, nothing else. So this is defined by the what is likeness, and this definition has the character. I would even say that the definition has the character of an assertion of identity. Maybe it's also too strong, but conscious phenomenality amounts. When we try to explain conscious phenomenality, we use what it is like description and vice versa. So the dual model, on the other hand, requires the separation of phenomenality or phenomenal character or phenomenal content, if you wish, and what it is likeness. And leaving aside a range of differences between these two models, unitary and dual, this view suggests that it's not reasonable to talk of being in a certain unconscious phenomenal state in terms of what it is like features. Now, this led us to the controversy or the controversial case in our papers that we wrote with Tomáš Marwan. Unconscious perception processing approaches usually state that the difference between conscious and unconscious perception is that unconscious perceiving is somewhat impoverished. It's standardly assumed that the missing properties are the phenomenal properties. On the other hand, the two-factor model or dual model states that phenomenal properties, the qualitative character, may be preserved at the, say, non or maybe rather pre-conscious level as well in visual perception, for example, and thus other property must be missing. And I would like to follow up based on this dual model. I would like to claim that the property of being vivid is missing in these unconscious cases. The strength of the vividness, the non-content property of our experience. And even so, unconscious perception is unconscious in virtue of reducing vividness and not necessarily of reducing phenomenality. I said I take vividness to refer to the intensity with which we experience a given stimulus, regardless of the properties of the stimulus, and this statement needs to be cashed out. It's certainly not meant to say that the properties of the stimulus, and I have already said that, do not play a role in how strongly we experience a given stimulus. That's not, I don't want to say this. But surely these properties have a causal role, an amplifying or attenuating role or effect on how we experience. But on the other hand, I tend to claim that it's not a constitutive role. Vividness then, as a subjective experience intensity, is constitutively independent of the properties. I mean, I would emphasize the term constitutively. It's not in that, it's in the constitutive sense. They are independent of the properties of the stimulus, precisely because, and that's the reason why, precisely because the same stimulus can have an amplifying influence at one moment. You can feel it as a very strong, having a very strong experience, subjective experience of a stimulus, but you can have an attenuating, or you can have quite low level experience or attenuated experience at another moment with the same stimulus. So the question is then why? And at the end, finally, two or three more slides concerning the the empirical cases, content-specific and content-invariant model. I would like to illustrate this point first on a kind of toy example that I took from Barnett et al. This is another paper that I would highly recommend for you to read. And two models are distinguished here. The content-specific model, top left, which is on the top on the left, top left, and bottom left, assumes that changes in experience stimulus intensity, that is the vividness, are always driven by changes in content and are therefore content specific. They are not only determined by they don't not only determine the content, but they are constitutive for the content. And then they offer another model that is content invariant, and that's what they argue for then in the paper, and I show it on the empirical studies. I will just give you a sip of it later. And then they offer another model that is content invariant, which is top right and bottom right. And this model assumes that changes in experience stimulus intensity are not necessarily dependent on content properties. And this model on the right, there is a specifically dedicated neural activity. It's not just one neuron, of course, just an example, but it's a specifically kind of bunch of neurons or something that are distributed in the visual cortex and other areas, frontal areas mostly as well. And in this model, this specific neural activity is solely responsible for the experience intensity, for the magnitude, or for what they call magnitude basically, and what I call, and they as well call, vividness. That is here neuron C, but this hypothesized neural activity is a neural correlate of vividness in the sense that I try to advocate here or argue for it here as well. Now, in terms of neural underpinnings, Fazekashi's model allows for that the intensity and specificity may have a different neural implementation. While subjective intensity could be implemented as he kind of speculating on that in his paper, but intensity could be implemented as a firing rate, as frequency or amplitude, and subjective specificity is correlated more with, which I don't understand how it can be the case, but this is how he sees it, that it can be correlated more with topological and structural properties, a level of recruitment of representations at lower levels of the visual hierarchy, and particularly in early visual areas with small receptive field and fields and sensitivity. Now, and we are slowly getting to the end. In Barnett et al., they then go further and they reanalyze two data sets from MEG and the other was from fMRI studies attempting to find a case for content invariant vividness. And by comparing the data of neural patterns for conscious and unconscious experience, they use the paradigm of a visual masking paradigm and asking by pass scale. So I'm going back to the pass scale, and they attempting to find this case by comparing the data of neural patterns for conscious and unconscious experience, so unconscious experience, based on awareness measured by pass. And with data based on predictive models, and they conclude that there is a content invariant neural signature of vividness, mostly in visual parietal and mostly in frontal cortices. So the vividness here is operationalized in their paper is operationalized as a subjective ratings of awareness and visibility, as we know and use it from pass scale, and in psychological or phenomenal terms as strength of perceptual experience, phenomenal, which they call phenomenal magnitude. So this is basically this identical conceptual, the phenomenal magnitude is vividness in their case. So, and this phenomenal magnitude is what I tend to call content-free vividness. And the last slide is, I hope I'm on time still. 2 minutes. 2 minutes, okay. Okay, sorry. Vividness is this is just a repetition of what I've said. The suggestion is that vividness is a content-free, kind of universal modality, non-specific feature or property, subjectively experienced property, but not content-dependent property in terms of it's not constitutive for them. Content is not constitutive or not necessarily constitutive for vividness. And it seems to me that the main advantage of this model could be that it should better explain these negative correlations between stimulus properties and phenomenal properties. Well, and that's the end. So thank you for your vivid attention.
Thank you. Thank you a lot. We have time for questions, but I have a question whether there is here Maria Giovanna Corrado. No? So we have one slot more, so time, one. So we have 5 minutes for questions or even more.
Yeah, interesting talk. Thanks. But when I think of, if I close my eyes and try and recall a redness experience, I experience something that's redness, but it's not vivid. But when I open my eyes and I see redness, it's very vivid. Am I using that in the right kind of terminology? Is memory redness that's not vivid?
I would say, contrary to your view, that your also I don't know however your experience was, or I cannot get to your brain, and I cannot answer this question directly, as in cases of Qualia. But I would say that your experience definitely can be very vivid, which is the supposition or of this mental imagery, research. So there can be more or less vivid experience. But I definitely agree. If you get to this, if this is what you aim at, I definitely agree that it would be nice to compare the differences in meaning when we use the term vividness for imaginary cases, for mental imaginary cases, and for cases of standard like visual or auditory or olfactory, whatever perception, whether there is some, I don't know, definitional or conceptual shift. But I would rather vote for that there is no conceptual shift, that this is just the case of question of a level of how the quantity can be leveled, or I don't know whether I answered you.
Okay, next question.
That's basically where my mind was going, was where is that basically? Because I have memories of vivid experiences that I cannot replicate today.
Yes. Right, but it very much. It seems to me it very much depends on that you still stick to the standard view that content properties determine how vivid the experience will be. If, for example, if I imagine something from my childhood, I'm sure that as regards the content properties, I would also say it's not vivid as it used to be when I was young at the time of that the event happened. But I talk about vividness as kind of parameter that is likely very close to, now I don't want to destroy the talk, but close to awareness, because this is also the way that many people use it in this size. And Barnett also, I can show you a quotation where Barnett uses it in terms of, okay, maybe vividness is a awareness, and that's what you follow, what you try to what is in the pass scales, basically. You sometimes also ask how much you were aware of the stimulus, on the 4-point scale. But that's right, yeah. Yeah, but with the glasses again, this also, in my view, it's again the case of talking about content properties of you change something. Of course, you now see it. I now see clearly things with glasses. Yeah, that is something that helps me. But the debate is still. This debate is still only about content properties. I'm talking about that you can have blurred experience that is very, very vivid. I would separate the for example, one of these properties like blurriness from what vividness means. So that's basically the. Oh yeah, right. Okay.
Michael, very good. I probably struggled with the way you were approaching these topics. The language and things wouldn't have been necessarily how I would have come into it. But I'm just wondering if I am seeing a very interesting overlap with the concept, the key concept that you're coming up with, and what we were presenting in Indian knowledge systems, that there is a distinctiveness between stimulus, information, which comes in the eyes and how the eyes deal with it, how the brain has got it, and actually the information that is available for conscious experience. And there is this distinction, and I often use these sort of illusions and things to show that there is a big distinction between stimulus and experience. And the Indian model system separates the aspect of information that is not physical. It is more considered in the kind of mental content, but it is kind of proto-phenomenal, meaning that it is available for phenomenal experience, but not yet exhibiting the qualia that requires consciousness to attend to it. So when you mentioned awareness, you know, maybe I would kind of be thinking it's the awareness that is your vividness, and it's the vividness is giving me the awareness, and maybe that's the sort of connection between two, what might have been seen as different models.
Right. Okay. I agree with what you have said. Maybe we get finally to the point where, and this would be also, you know, this is what the philosophy wants. You know, just clarify the concept, and maybe we can follow the Occam's razor principle, and finally we may get to the point where we have to decide between using vividness, concept of vividness, and awareness. Because awareness is also a problematic concept. It's usually confused with consciousness, and I myself sometimes don't know. I'm not sure while reading the empirical studies whether they are talking about consciousness or what do they mean by awareness and so on. So maybe this will be the Occam's using the Occam's razor and say, okay, the concept of vividness is totally wrong. We don't need to use it. We can just use the concept of awareness or proto awareness, maybe. I don't know, proto something. I don't know whether.
While not the same thing, do you think there's some complementary character between valence and vividness?
That's a good question. Valence. Could you please give me a particular example for example, emotions or whatever?
Well, insofar as valence directs attention, say in an emotive context, away or towards the stimulus or the experience, vividness similarly directs our attention toward or away. Not quite in the same way, in the sense of having a polarity, more like a variation in intensity. But things which are vivid capture the attention, direct it in ways that might be similar or analogous to positive or negative valence. You can certainly have various experiences with valence that have almost none at all. Like there's no character of valence associated with it. Another person could have a similar experience and have a very strong valence. So in that way, while it's not sort of dual polar, it does have this character of unipolar, with an amplitude varying from no vividness to extremely vivid.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I mean, I don't know how to answer to that now. I'll think over it more carefully. Yeah. Valence. Yes. Have to think about it. Sorry.
Okay. I have one short question because the concept of vividness, according to you, is model independent. Yeah, it is applicable to auditory
across modalities, across perceptual modalities, so to speak.
Yeah,
I haven't thought about
your
it.
examples focused on some physical features, yeah, that are difficult to translate into or find an analogy, for example, in audition or especially in smell and so on. So this is one phenomenon, vividness, or maybe there are some differences between auditory vividness or visual vividness or smell vividness.
That's a very good question as well. Thank you for that. I would hope for that. This is still work in progress, basically, but I would hope for that this should be the same kind of or same vividness, samely defined vividness for across, not only across visual modality or across perceptual modalities, but maybe across other ones like these emotions and other things.
Okay. Thank you a lot. Thank you again. Now I have to switch from being a chair to being a presenter. So, okay, so I'm a musicologist, so I'd like to focus on a part of consciousness which is related to our experience of music, but I'd like to present also a view in which our proto-musical experiences of rhythm and proto-musical experiences of musical pitch are, in my opinion, a very crucial state in the evolution of human consciousness. So the title of my presentation is related to musical pitch and rhythm, Qualia, as the primordial source of complex conceptual consciousness of human beings. So we know that human consciousness is filled by very, very different phenomena, from qualia, very simple qualia related to taste or vision, to very complex ideas. When we have conscious experiences, we often refer to vision or some concepts or some concepts depicted by language, yeah, or even mathematical concepts, and so on, or emotions, for example. But consciousness, in fact, is something which we believe is not only characteristic to human beings, but also to the other animals. And if this is true, it means that probably different animals possess different types of consciousness. Probably you remember this famous article by Nagel, written by Nagel, about how to be a bat. Yeah? So we know that the environment of bat is completely different than environment of human beings. This is true also for the environment of octopus, which probably is a conscious creature. Yeah. So the common denominator is that all these animals probably produces some kind of consciousness, but the difference is that the content of these consciousnesses is different. Yeah? And I believe that our consciousness is human specific, that because we use language, because we use some mathematical concepts, our content of our consciousness is different than the content of consciousness of chimpanzees or especially very evolutionarily distant creatures such as octopuses or even animals that live in oceans. Yeah, so the reason for the unique nature or conspecific nature, biologically speaking, of consciousness is related to the fact that every species has its own phylogenesis, or its own history of predecessors. And in this history, the environment must have shaped their development of their nervous system and then the development of consciousness. So if we think about bats, we know that we are not that bats are of course mammals, but we are not closely related as with chimpanzees. But sometimes it can be environmental change which can create selective pressures that can lead to similar effects, like probably in the case of dogs, because dogs co-evolved with humans and they started to react to the same environment and even to the cultural environment of human beings. So probably some elements of dogs' consciousness can be similar to our, but of course not the same. But what about the role of music and what is specific of human consciousness? So one very interesting, from my point of view, idea is the idea that something which is specific to human mind and human consciousness is related to hierarchy, to the ability to create a hierarchy of our experience. This is hypothesis called dendrophilia. Tecumseh-Fitch proposed this idea in 2014. Dendrophilia can be misleading because this is not an idea which joins our likeness of trees, of course. This is related to the fact that the hierarchies, especially in hierarchies in language, but also in music, are analyzed by the use of some schemes that are similar to they are called tree schemes, because they have some branches, and these branches represents different relations, hierarchical relations, and we know that we use this type of experience, this type of processes in our mind, not only in language but also in music. And what is specific to music is that music is based on musicality, on the set of abilities that allow us to be musical, to interpret sounds in terms of cognitive musical patterns, but also to produce music. And the two main parts of musicality are related to our experience of musical rhythm and our experience of musical pitch, independent of whether we think about Western music or extra European music or Indian music. Our cognition of music is related to something which is specific solely to music. So in the case of rhythm, usually when we listen to music, we try to interpret music in terms of musical pulse. We experience a kind of circulation in our experience, even movement. But when we think about musical pitch, it is different. The experience of pitch is, of course, related in general to the experience of harmonic sounds and sometimes even not harmonic sounds. And we experience pitch also when we listen to speech. But the difference between the experience of pitch and music, in contrast to speech, is that this is discrete. We can recognize some intervals, some pitch intervals, and this is what an average person is able to do. We know it because there is a very famous test for amusia, and this test shows that there is only 1.5% of people in our population who are unable to recognize music, who are unable to recognize the differences between discrete pitches or discrete elements in musical rhythm. But what is even more interesting in this fact is that we experience musical pitches and rhythm exactly in terms of hierarchies. It means that some pitches and melodies are more important for us, are emotionally more stable, and the other are less important, less stable. And this is something which probably is specific solely to our conscious experience of sounds, or at least in such an elaborate way. And I would like to propose that the appearance of hierarchy, of this type of hierarchy, occurs in the past in the hominins' life. Hominins, this is the group of species that lived, some of them were our predecessors, but all of them lived after the split with our common ancestors with chimpanzees. And chimpanzees are completely unmusical creatures. They are unable almost unable to synchronize with rhythm, with music. They are unable to produce melodies. They don't recognize melodies. So it means that the evolution of this type of experience had to happen after the split with our common ancestors. And yeah, in the literature you can find a lot of different hypotheses about the potential selective pressures that causes this change in our mind. But what is, one of them is, for example, the function of music as a kind of social facilitator, but you can also find some other ideas like communication of some information, or as an aposematic signal, or a detection of free riders, and a lot of many of them. But this is not very important for this talk, because what is more important is that in this process of this evolution, I suggest that there was a kind of communicative niche in which our ancestors, our hominins ancestors, tested different types of communications in order to achieve some goals important for them. And some of them, they use, of course, gestures, or touch, but also sound. And sound sound started to be a very important tool of communication by means of the direct eliciting some emotional states. This is also observable in speech prosody. In speech prosody, we manipulate the emotional state of the listeners. Sometimes even it is believed that it is more important how we speak, not what we want to express in speech, in some context, especially in politics, for example. So in this idea, I believe that our ancestors started to use sound as a part of a ritual to increase the social relations, to support or to show that we are a part of a group, for example. And in order to do this, they started to learn specific melodies, and in order to do this, these melodies started to be hierarchical. And in this model, I propose that we should refer to so-called the Baldwin effect or Baldwinian evolution, in which the beginnings of the evolution of a particular trait is related to cultural invention. And only then this cultural invention, if it is adaptive, if it needs a lot of effort, and if it is so important to last for many generations, sooner or later natural selection would start to prefer individuals who are accidentally gifted to be more successful in learning a particular type of signal. And in that case, this is a kind of chain of events. Cultural invention, then is the cultural stability of this trait. There is a natural selection of this individuals who are stable, and so on and so on. And the result is that some new features evolve, and we know that to do this, a kind of neural plasticity is necessary, and one of them is so-called neural repurposing that we observe in contemporary populations. For example, the difference between tonal languages and non-tonal languages can impact or the living in this environment can impact the processing of these two types of languages in such a way that if we compare the processing of, tonal languages in people who speaks these languages as mother tongues, they usually process this language with less lateralization in comparison to people who use tonal languages as a second language, not mother tongue, which means that our brains are so plastic that are able to borrow some elements, in that case, some parts of the right hemisphere, which is dedicated to analyze the content of pitch, yeah, to function in language. Yeah, so the same process, I believed, had to happen in the past, in the hominin past, and this is the scheme which depicts the stages of the evolution of the complex consciousness of contemporary human beings. So it started from a non-hierarchical consciousness in which or in Australopithecines, for example, in which only pitch height or tempo or some referential concepts are available in the consciousness. But then first abstract concepts started to be a part of consciousness, but still non-hierarchical. And in that case, because of the need of communication between individuals, the hierarchy started to be important thing, but because our ancestors started to use hierarchy in music, yeah, the same tool which was previously used only to music was borrowed to fulfill the rest of the conscious experience, mainly languages, but not only in language, but also in mathematics and so on, and creates the part of hierarchical content of consciousness. Okay, and this is last slide with some references. Thank you very much. I hope that I controlled time. So now is the time for questions. If you have some questions, I will try to answer.
In the last slide, just curious, where do you think lies stand in this diagram? Like the ability or the feature of lying to each other and like trying to trick each other when it comes to...
You mean lying?
Yeah.
Yeah, lying is important. So this is a very, very interesting difference between speech prosody and semantics and speech and phonological system on speech, that it is very hard to lie in prosody and very easy to lie in semantics. So I think that lying is something which evolved later, and this system, this musical system, is devoid of cheating. Yeah, this is a kind of honest signal. There is a term in biology, evolutionary biology, which is called honest signal, and it means that it is used in such a way that it sends some real information. Yeah? But of course, cheating is something which I think that a kind of lie or cheating was very important in this process of the evolution of hierarchy, because, you know, if someone is able to be a free rider, to cheat, that I am devoted to the society, but in fact I am not, and if there is a kind of ritual which shows that people are devoted and they have to devote a lot of time to learn a new melody, but someone is gifted and he or she can just do it much faster. So this is a kind of strategy that can be treated as a lying. Yeah? And if this lying is advantageous, yeah, it gives some advantage, and natural selection prefer this kind of individuals. Yeah? Thanks.
Just want to understand better, what do you mean by non-hierarchical and hierarchical consciousness?
Okay, so non-hierarchical consciousness is related to the first level of qualia, for example. Yeah, if we speak about colors, yeah, we don't have hierarchy of colors, at least as long as we don't use colors to depict something which is conceptual. Yeah? Yeah, so there is nothing more important in green than in red. Yeah, except for, of course, some biological constraints that are related to the probably faster reaction to red or loud sound. Yeah, but this is not a hierarchy. But hierarchy is something which occurs in our communicative systems like language and music. So when I speak, I have to use hierarchy of words because some words are more important, like nouns, yeah, in a sentence. Not all nouns, but you probably know the grammatical analysis. Yeah, this tree scheme which depicts the grammatical relations shows that some words in terms of grammars are more important than the others. Some of them can be just avoided, but the meaning is still almost the same. Yeah, but if you avoid one important word, yeah, for example, the main verb, the sentence is hard to understand, yeah, often. Yeah, so this is hierarchy, and I believe that the same occurs in our conscious experience. Yeah, our experience, for example, of the family relations, yeah, is also hierarchical. The relations between people, yeah, in our society, yeah, is also. This is something which somehow impacts our consciousness, but it can impact it only because we have such cognitive patterns in our mind. Yeah, so I don't know whether I answered this question clear.
I think it's working. Remembering the poster I saw yesterday, it seems like consciousness, at least in the sort of terms that we're familiar with, comes about a bit later in the sort of evolutionary track because it requires that sort of like social signaling and therefore complex social structures in order to come about. Am I reading that correctly?
So I do not claim that consciousness appeared only among hominins in our lineage. I only want to emphasize that complex hierarchical consciousness evolved in this time. Yeah? I believe that the common ancestors of humans and chimpanzees was or must have been conscious creature, or probably all primates are conscious. Yeah? But the consciousnesses of every species of primate is a little bit different. Yeah? So there is a common part of consciousness of all primates. Probably the fact that our consciousness is mainly composed of visual elements is something which we share with primates, because the visual cortex in primates dominates the cortical, the number of, no, not number, the visual cortex is the biggest sensory cortex in the primate's brain, but not among dogs. Yeah? So I think that the fact that it is so easy to correlate vision with concepts is the inheritance of primates evolution. Yeah, very, very old.
Thank you.
Hierarchies emerge with respect to some parameter.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say in this case it would be with regard to salience?
Yes. So salience is maybe a very simple element of hierarchy. So if we have some signal, a signal, yeah, which is composed of something which is salient and not salient, this is the first step of hierarchy. Yeah, but this is not a very complex hierarchy. So I think that maybe this type of relations could be present at this stage. Yeah? Because salience, you know, this is similar to the previous talks. Yeah, salience is something which is in our head. Yeah, salience is something which can occur when we think about the hierarchy of musical rhythm. Yeah? If we think about meter, yeah, there is a very famous experiment from the end of the 19th century. When we listen to isochronic sounds, yeah, the same sounds, we experience that every second or every third sound is louder, even if it isn't. Yeah? So this is the experience of salience and hierarchy, very simple hierarchy. So if there are no more questions, thank you for your attention. And now is the time for our last speaker, Violetta Kostka from Poland, and her presentation is titled Conceptual Associations While Listening to Paweł Szymański 2 Studies of Piano.
My speech also will be about communication, musical communication, of course. Over the past few decades, scholars have reoriented the discussion of meaning construction. Meaning, their content grows out of our bodily makeup, our social exchanges, and the shape of our surroundings. It is not an intrinsic property of expressions, but an activity that humans continually perform. Since the publication of Lakoff and Johnson's conceptual metaphor theory in 1980, scholars have advanced several complementary accounts of how meaning arises. Yes, it works. Chief among them is Gilles Fauconnier and Mark Turner's conceptual blending theory from 2002. The cognitivists argue that much of human thought and action relies on a recurrent operation. We gather concepts into provisional mental spaces, into input spaces, a generic space and a blended space, and weave those spaces into a conceptual integration network. Two processes shape every network: the mapping of counterparts between the input spaces and the selective projection of elements from those input spaces into the blended space. Because these mental operations are intricate, the authors translate key aspects into conceptual integration network diagrams, where mental spaces are represented by circles, elements by points in the circles, and connections between elements in different spaces by lines. Such cognitive operation is usually dynamic and divides into three stages: composition, completion, and elaboration. The first puts together the elements to create a new entity in the blended space. The second extends the initial image, drawing on our background knowledge. And the third develops the structure of the blending space by activating our imagination. The whole process yields a novel meaning and an idea present in none of the source spaces, but emerging from their momentary fusion. Years of empirical use of ongoing refinement by Fauconnier, Turner, and ever-growing community of scholars have led to several adjustments in the application of conceptual blending theory. One prominent revision concerns the generic space. Todd Oakley and Esther Pascule omit it from their conceptual integration network diagrams. Consequently, the material formerly housed in the generic space is now typically articulated outside the diagram. Musicologists recognize the promise of conceptual blending theory almost as soon as Fauconnier and Turner propose it. Their attraction is easy to see. Blending illuminates both intramusical meaning, say the friction of modal and major minor strata within a single passage, and extra-musical meaning, say text painting, programmatic allusions, narrative cues. The aim of this paper is to check whether conceptual blending theory could help to explain the meanings created by the recipients while listening to musical works. The case study is two studies, two etudes for piano from 1986 of Polish leading composer Paweł Szymański, born in 1954. His music is strongly intertextual, what means that he often refers to medieval, baroque, or classical idioms. Since the early 1980s, he has pursued what he calls a surconventional or two-level technique, beginning with a conventional structure, for example, a Bach fugue or a Bach style fugue, because it is composed by himself. He subjects that scaffold to free or algorithmically specified transformation and ornamental expansion. Let's listen to the beginning of the first study. Like almost half of Paweł Szymański's works, the first study has a mechanical structure. It is filled with shorter or longer series of identical chords, the first of which is always loud, written in white, and further ones always softer, written in black. The loud chords were taken from an initial structure in the Baroque style and then repeated according to a specific algorithm. In the final work, all chords are in 8-note rhythm in 5/8 meter, but the pulse is blurred. Throughout the piece, the size of the series of identical chords systematically expands, which allows us to distinguish 8 episodes. Both the genre and compositional technique of the first study could suggest that listeners will perceive it as a self-referential work, but nothing could be further from the truth. After reviewing publications devoted to this study, written mainly by music critics, the list of meanings of an intuitive character is as on the slide. There are 2 groups of meanings which circle around one idea. The first group focuses on the echo idea. Echo effect, more and more frequent reflections in the form of echoes, etude immersing itself in the affect of an apparent echo. The second group concerns the problem of time, but due to the limited time now, I skip it. Why do the music critics associate the first study with the echo phenomenon? It is so because they have experienced echo earlier and because there is analogy between the 2 phenomena. Diagram presents a conceptual integration network suitable for a chord series from the 4th episode of the study. Here, the echo phenomenon is composed of a loud sound source and its single or multiple reflections, whereas the musical event is broken down into a loud chord and 3 repetitions of the same chord in softer dynamics. From the relationships between elements in a single input and from the correspondence of elements between the inputs, a completely new frame structure is created in the listener's imagination, encompassing features derived from both the music and the experience of nature. It includes an integration of elements bringing the following meaning: an imaginary musical event with the characteristics of a physical phenomenon, in short, musical echo. Because a series of identical chords expands from the beginning to the end of the work, the entire first study can be called expanding the musical echo. Now, listen to the middle extract of the second study. Although Szymański's second study is the opposite of the first one, it is also algorithmic. The composition was created based on a single voice structure modeled on Baroque writing. Its ultimate version is a single voice melody regularly flowing in 16th notes without meter, composed alternately of two types of sections. Quasi-Baroque sections are characterized by the doubling of each note, while modernist sections have indirect repetitions of individual notes. The audience and music critics like this composition very much, and to date have created many different meanings seen on the slide. There is a group of meanings focused on an idea of movement, the titanic flows of sounds. The idea of a single voice fugue, where musical fugue means an escape. The third meaning, the study looking for a melody only to lose it and find it, suggests alternating activities. There is not enough time to explain these three meanings. So in this situation, I will use my own meaning, which accumulates all of them. Its initial name is musical movement of two types. Because the second study is composed alternately of two types of sections, I am going to show you two diagrams built for two adjacent sections from the middle of the work. The first example is a quasi-Baroque section which elicits a double scope network with two input spaces, a physical movement and a musical event. The physical movement includes an agent in space who makes regular and fast movement, changes places, and has a clear goal for this movement. The musical event is analogous to the physical movement. It is composed of melody with doubling each note, with regular 16th notes at a fast tempo. The melody has three different motifs and as a whole moves towards the tonic, that is, to the most important pitch. Thanks to the correspondence of selected elements from the two input spaces, one gets a physical and musical blend, resulting in a new meaning. A musical movement like a fast run with a precisely defined goal. The musical movement mentioned here is not real, but imagined. We can talk about it because we have experience of our physical movement in space. The relevant conceptual integration network integration network related to the modernist sections is similar to the preceding network, but has a few different elements. The music is associated with the agent doing some fast physical movement, but does not lead to a new place, nor does it have any clear goal. The agent could, for example, be pounding an electric treadmill or running in a circle. In the musical input, the equivalent of the agent is the one-voice melody characterized by the indirect repetitions of individual notes and regular 16th notes in a fast tempo, but also by lack of recognizable motifs and no gravitation to tonic. Under the influence of integration of concepts from both inputs, my imagination constructs the following meaning: musical movement like a fast run in a circle. All the quasi-Baroque sections of the second study differ in details, and the same can be said about the modernist sections, but these differences do not prevent the creation of a narrative for the entire study. In my interpretation, the study is a quick musical movement in two alternating manners, running with a clearly defined goal and running in a circle. One can envision a musical persona fleeing across a musical landscape, looking around occasionally. Yes, I have. And conclusion. Maybe I will see what I've written before. First, it is very important to say that this is not, studies are not programmatic genre, and yet the listeners attributed extra musical meanings to these works. And it can be explained by two arguments. First is that these studies were not aesthetically indifferent to the listeners. And second is that music is, or sound is fluid and evanescent. So these studies have been, yes, they have been mapped cross-modally. What else? Yes, although thoughts went in different directions, there were also some meanings which were very close to each other. And this convergence suggests that we draw upon a common reservoir of listening habits and cultural reference. What else? Extra musical meanings were subjected to double scope blending of non-musical and musical inputs. And models I used revealed that conceptual associations are embodied and immersed in the knowledge of nature. And it also revealed that mental processes were not arbitrary, but based on the principle of analogy. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you a lot. And now we have 18 minutes for questions. So, who wants to ask first question?
Thank you. I wasn't hoping to get music composition tips from this talk, but I did. I actually have, it's not like a question, but something I thought of as, I don't remember who said it, but it's some mindfulness talk that I was listening. And it has to do with describing your inner landscape. Like if you can't name your emotions, then try to describe the landscape that you have inside, because it's kind of the same thing. Even if you can't find a word for an emotion, if you feel cloudy, that may give you some idea. That's what it reminded me of, because even if you can't make someone run with the music that you composed, you can kind of trigger the same movements in the brain that kind of stimulates a run, which is very interesting. It's not really a question, sorry.
Yes, it is comment, but just in point. I tried to explain that these associations we have, and usually they are not musicians who have more such associations. They are very typical, and then we can explain how they are created. First of all, they are created. Second, it's usually because of this cross-modal mapping. We are not conscious during this creative process, probably. But a scientist who is trying to explain this using, for example, this method, can find a solution, an explanation. And I gave you some examples. In the first case, it was that there were a few music critics from Poland, from abroad, who compared the first study to the echo. And I showed you that it wasn't by chance, that it is motivated. There are arguments for this meaning. In the second case, I tried to argue that we compare this musical process to our movement. And it was always this way, but not from far. We know how it works in our minds.
Thank you. Next question. So I'd like to ask you one question.
Okay.
My question is related to the problem of different types of meaning that you presented. Because do we really need concepts to interpret music in such a way? Because, for example, if we think about the relations between musical tempo and movement, from the neurological perspective, our experience of tempo is based on the motor analysis. Yeah, so do we really need this kind of operations, cognitive operations, in which we have relations between concepts of movement on the one hand and the concepts of musical tempo on the other hand, or whether this is just a type of experience of music?
When I want to speak about meanings, the last, say, level of hierarchy, so I think it is necessary to use concept. But but there are many, there are many other levels in the middle, then we can feel it more than say in words, and then this can be treated as an experience. You can have many experienced, but after the concert is finished, people go out to the corridor and speak about the music they heard, and then they use words. And in at this moment,
this is more about interpretation than experience. This theory.
Yes.
Okay. Next question. We have 12 minutes. If not, thank you very much. Thank you, the audience, and for the very interesting discussions and questions and also answers. And see you even today during the poster session. Yeah. So thank you again.